Alrighty, good morning, everybody. I'm going to try to get started here. Thank you all so much for coming to the Smart Fabrics Summit, hosted here for the first time in Washington, D.C. My name is Joshua Teitelbaum. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Textiles, Consumer Goods, and Materials here at the Department of Commerce. I want to thank everybody for coming. We really appreciate it. It's a really exciting day here to host you and this really fantastic group. I want to thank a lot of people who helped make this happen. You don't have 180 people in a room like this without a lot of work going into it. So thank you to, first of all, our co-hosts for today, the Industrial Fabrics Association International, without whom this certainly would not exist. So thank you to Mary, the CEO of IFAI, as well as Andrew Aho and the entire team for making this happen. So thank you guys very much. Thank you to our gold sponsor, the Consumer Technology Association, and all of our exhibitors, Propel, DuPont, Drexel University, Coded Technical Solutions, Ionics, Directed Vapor Technologies, PureThread, Becart, and Noble Biomaterials. Please spend some time at their tables outside. They have some really innovative technologies, some really impressive work that's going on. So please spend some time meeting our sponsors as well as our exhibitors. Thank you to our venue hosts, the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center. It is a beautiful space to host this, even if the weather isn't cooperating and it's rainy inside. We have a nice view of the plaza. And thank you to the tireless staff in the Office of Textiles and Apparel at the Department of Commerce, especially Lori Meese, Terry Labatt, Kim Nguyen, and Marilyn Landgraf. The staff in the Office of Textiles and Apparel is the real source of knowledge about the textiles and apparel industry in the Department of Commerce. So I have a debt of gratitude to those folks every day. So thank you to OTEXA. Last year, we began an effort in the Office of Textiles and Apparel to understand not just where textiles and apparel were being sourced from and exported to, but also how the products themselves were changing and what that meant for the U.S. industry. After more than 36 conversations with leaders from the apparel, tech, and textiles world, as well as academic researchers, government agencies, we came to a few conclusions. One was that the applications for and potential growth of smart fabrics was very real. And second, that there were some hurdles that needed to be overcome in order to realize that opportunity. Recognizing that need and the unique ability of the Department of Commerce to convene the private and public sectors, the Smart Fabrics Summit was born. Today, we have over 100 attendees, including speakers and sponsors, another 100 people on a waiting list, so thank you guys for registering early. To talk about some of the most important policy issues facing this emerging industry. The manufacturing challenge of building a textile product with integrated electronics, the federal research investment that's now ongoing to help develop some of the enabling technologies for smart fabrics, the importance of protecting your intellectual property and consumer data from the very beginning of product design, and the need for standards to set the foundation for growth. We'll be talking about all of that and more today to foster collaboration across the apparel, tech, and textile sectors, to educate federal agencies about the capabilities of smart fabrics, and to spread the word that the textile industry is high-tech, adding jobs for the last 2 years and increasing exports by 40% since 2009. We want to send the message that the Department of Commerce is your partner in innovation. So as the MC for today, I have just a few instructions and I'll get out of the way. I'll be announcing the panelists and presenters from the podium. So to our speakers, please be ready to take the stage when the preceding presentation has finished. For our audience, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions of our presenters in our first 4 panels from a microphone in the middle of the room that we should have set up. And last, don't be shy on social media to join the conversation. Just use the hashtag SmartFabrics. With that, I will turn the microphone over to Jeff Rasmussen, the Market Research Manager at IFAI, to help set some context for our day. Jeff has more than 20 years' experience in market research with special expertise in customer satisfaction studies, industry and competitor analysis, and is a recognized expert in the specialty fabrics industry. So please help me welcome to the stage Jeff Rasmussen.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for allowing me to have the opportunity to present to you today. It is really a thrill. I've been doing this for a little while, and to come here and to be able to embrace this and share this with you is really a wonderful experience. So what I wanted to start with, switch hands here, sorry. Start with is basically to start with what is smart fabrics? And what it is what way we look at it is it's an interactive textile system. It's wearable products that incorporate electronics. They have smart materials that sense external environmental conditions, and as a consequence, they'll alter their state or their functionality. And you'll see some examples of this as we go through this. There's two kinds of sensors. There's passive sensors that sense environmental conditions, and then there are active sensors that actually do something. They react to something, and we'll be showing you examples of that also. Then I wanted to talk about how this is part of a system, an infrastructure, if you will, that is integrated together and consists of the likes of conductive yarn fabric for transmission, many connectors and tiny circuits. In this area, it's gotten a lot better, and that's why the acceptance of smart fabrics is doing better and better out in the market. Then we have textile sensors, and then, of course, you have a power sourcing system. And over here we have an example of some sensing and monitoring, like environmental hazards. There's a company out of California, as a matter of fact, that is working with MIT, making a military uniform that repels chemical and biological agents. And then there's users' health, and we're going to have a plethora of examples of this. And then you're also going to see some a number of examples today on the processing and capturing of feedback from smart fabrics. A lot of times applications or apps in smartphones. And then we're going to have actuating or protection. You'll see some of the examples of that, like outside threats or risks, like a bullet-resistant vest, protecting, say, somebody in the Army or police officer. And then risk from within, there are smart bandages, for example, that will change colors to, change a color, I should say, that will indicate an infection. So that's just something to kick off and get going on there. Now I wanted to talk about the size of the market. And what we're starting with right away is the worldwide market. And you're going to see a nice projection here, 5-year projection from 2012 all the way up here into what we see for this year. Last year came in at about $1.9 billion, and we're projecting about a $2.25 billion in 2016 of this year. And the annual growth rate worldwide is about 18%, and this has been pretty steady over the years. And in comparison to that, I wanted to show the U.S. market and the size and the growth rates. Now you can see a very similar pattern. Well, this isn't by accident. We're probably about 45% of the market in the United States. And we're about $1 billion, so you take that against $2.25 billion, it's about 45%. And again, the nice progression, and you can just really see it was about 27% a year. It's come down to right around roughly 21% the last few years. And a lot of this has to do with the worldwide malaise of economic GDP growth. China, for example, is in the 6 figures now. I think they were 6.8% in GDP. Now, all this stuff affects us. Our GDP for the last 2 years has been about 2.4%. So it does affect our, fast-growing markets like even smart fabrics. Now I wanted to kind of get into some of these segments of the smart fabric industry. Now this is worldwide 2015 smart fabric sales. And the largest market we have is transportation, and that's at about 27%. And this includes things like inflatable seat belts and heated seats. And then we go into the military and the government. You have a lot of things like uniforms and tents and police and so forth, protective vests. And then we have about 20% for the industrial commercial market. This is to do with a lot with construction and infrastructure. Workwear electronics is becoming a big market. This involves police, firefighters, construction workers, and the like, and emphasizes things like safety and communication. Now, one of the fastest growing markets, and this is sports and fitness, at about 17%, and I've seen in the last few years this has just really exploded. And so we're keeping our eye on the growth rate. I think has been about like 40% per year. I think it's the fastest growing one. We have. I'm going to skip over to medical because of what I just said. They're also a fast growing market. Coming on, they may be 7% of the market, but they're growing at a clip of around 33% a year. And then fashion. Now, we're an industrial textiles trade association, and so we always not paid attention, to fashion. But in this market, they have a real presence. 8% is the share that we have them at right now. And I want to just talk real briefly a little bit about some of these segments. One of the things that we just talked about was the transportation market. But one of the things that's happening is we're having a growing population that by 2050, it should be about 9.7 billion. So with that going on, right now a lot of the transportation choices for smart fabrics has been the individual automobile. But as time passes on, and it's not all that far away, 3/4 of the population is supposed to be moving and living in the cities. And this is going to have a lot to do with mass transit and intercity, and we feel very confident that smart fabrics are going to have a role and play in that. Then we have the military and the government, and for a while now, the military has been a real incubator for fabrics of high-tech material applications, and has been a real force in helping facilitate the consumer market for markets like motorcycle wear, sportswear for like snow skiing as an example. Physical monitoring is becoming real big, especially with the 75 million baby boomers going on. The industrial and commercial market, I mentioned earlier on workwear professional uniform segment, becoming a real growing and big market, not only in the United States, but in other markets, for example, China, who are becoming more and more industrialized, so safety concerns are becoming more demanded, and so products that play in that are coming to bear. Sports and fitness, I just mentioned this, and one of the things I wanted to mention is that even with the fast growth, one of the things is that a lot of the products that are out there are already available. They're state-of-the-art solutions. You can get them, a lot of them right now, and I'll show you some examples as we're going along. Medical and healthcare, again, a real budding market, and fashion. Now, fashion has been, that we sense, is surrounded more, really emphasizes the lighted fabrics. For example, purse. Ralph Lauren has what they call the Ricky bag. You open it up, and the inside of the bag illuminates because of 4 LED lights that come on. You can charge your cell phone, and then they even give you a cord that will charge your bag. So it's pretty interesting. And then smart glasses. Shipments of smart glasses are estimated to reach about 10 million this year, and about 1 billion when we get to the turn of this decade, 2019, excuse me. Now I want to kind of move on here to nanotechnology. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, they're really, really tiny microscopic particles that have especially specific qualities, physical and chemical properties, that when we incorporate them into fabrics, they can enhance and they can change the properties of that fabric. They're fire resistant, they can be conductive, they can be for, say, someone's vital signs, and the potential is just immense. And the military is really having a strong play in this. They have uniforms that change color to match the environment. We have lightweight battle suits that include bullet-resistant vests. The Army, for example, has a bullet-resistant nano battle suit. And why this is important, because a lot of the battle suits and so forth that have been brought up, and we'll show something later on, they're big and they're a little bit cumbersome. This is really thin. It's almost like spandex, but yet it incorporates health monitors and communication equipment. We have smart materials. This is also in some of the larger outfits, like the tallow suit I'll be talking about. But it'll respond to injuries, and once the injuries are detected, a wound healing sealing foam will be dispensed to stop the bleeding. More on medical, it will also, this has been borne out, that will have the capability of warning people of certain diseases that might be on the horizon, or that they may have at that time. Cancer or blood clots is another thing that has been shown. Now, the military, this is one of the biggest spenders. I mean, right now, I'm showing a table here where the market, for this year, we're projecting at about $1.5 billion in spend. Before 2013, they were always up around $2.2 billion and so forth. But there's been cutbacks, of course, with the military, specifically since the end of the war in Iraq back in 2011, and then sequestration has been a concern of the Defense Logistics Agency, which is responsible for supplying clothing for the military. They put caps on spending in the 2016 under the guise of the 2011 Budget Control Act. And so this has been a real concern for DLA of the reduced spending, and we reflect that here as a 6% drop. Some of the things that have been come along as a consequence of this is that the Army has spent almost 50% less on next-generation body armor. They're employing or using conversion kits to replace the outer shell of older outer tactical vests, and they're reusing the ceramic ballistic inserts and putting them in these kits, and it's saving a lot of money. One of the things, out of Natick, Massachusetts, the Army has a research center, and a couple of things that they're working on that they want to have come to fruition is, excuse me, we pressed the wrong button there. A lot of the future tents that they want to go forward with is they want them to be more ready to go. They want the electricity and the lighting already built in. They don't want to have to fabricate that after they get to wherever they're going to lay out the tents. They are looking at next generation photovoltaic technology where their advances in semiconductor activity will allow for lightweight solar cells that can be woven into textiles and tents, including, for example, this camouflage pattern material. And what this would help greatly with the military is having to haul around these big generators that you see here all the time, and with that comes a lot of fuel and so forth. So it would alleviate a lot of that. Now, also, what they're wanting to do, tents. They're used a lot in the armed services, but they tend in the seams they tend to leak. And nanotechnology is having a play in helping to repel the water and solve this problem. Now, this is the military tactical assault light operator suit. And this is a suit that came about as a consequence of some of the battlefield conditions in Afghanistan, particularly building-to-building battles, where special operations forces were having a devil of a time, and a number of them were getting killed, particularly if they were the first person coming through a door. So the head of the Special Operations Command, Bill McCraven at the time, wanted to come up with a suit that would solve this problem and enhance the chances of soldiers, survival rates. And so that's how this kind of got kicked in. And this started around May of 2013. Now, I have here an example of the existing gear, and then you have the future gear. And right now in the future, we have basic helmets that do a really pretty good job against bullets and shrapnel. We have the body armor. Now, this is one area, the body armor, that does a really good job, that they've done really good work in. BAE out of England, who has a large presence in the United States, has come up with a bullet-resistant vest that has 11 layers of Kevlar, and then they have shear thickening fluid in between each layer. So that's like half as... maybe about a third as many layers as they used to have in the Kevlar. And so it's made them lighter, and so it's made soldiers more agile, but yet the protection is even better. The bullet, when it makes impact now, the energy from the bullet, it spreads its on a wider breath and not penetrating further into the soldier. Then one of the things that, as you can see when you compare these two, is that the uniforms now, there's some work to be done for protection for soldiers. But one thing they do is they have like these boxers that are called, they call them blast boxers. They have 2 layers of Kevlar that give them some protection in their lower regions of the body. And these folks, soldiers, are carrying around a lot of weight. It's 125 pounds of weight that they're carrying around constantly. And then let's look over here on the right at the Talus suit. Now, in the helmet, what they're looking at is using Google-type like glass interfaces, so that one of the things in building combat situations like in Afghanistan is when they're looking for the enemy, being able to see around buildings without having to peer your head out and taking the chance of being shot. With the Google glasses, they can see through some of the buildings, and it really helps. The other thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is in the chest area, they are developing a ceramic metallic body armor. It's really lightweight. And on top of that, they have a combat shirt underneath that they're developing that monitors biosensors like the heart rate and the body temperatures of the soldier and so forth. And then underneath, as we look, we have this exoskeleton. And in this exoskeleton, one of the things about the exoskeleton is it's designed to help facilitate the physical capabilities of a soldier. And in this case, one of the things that has been a real challenge is providing a power source for these so that they last for a while, a power source that you can depend on. And one of the things they've come up with is an engine, if you will, which would be hooked to a battery pack that would also be clipped to the belt. The other things that they've come up with is having knee braces that through the movement of the soldier walking or running, it captures kinetic energy. And with that, then it converts that into electricity. And then they have a solar panel on the back of the soldier, which captures solar energy. So all this taken together is a driving effort to try to provide enough power to power this suit that you have. Now, one of the things that with this much weight and this much coverage from head to toe, they get really hot inside. So they've had to develop a cooling system that would regulate the body temperature of the soldier so they could be comfortable. Now I'm going to move on to another market. It's a little bit in the military market, but it's more consumer and police. And this is Dow Corning's intelligent fabric. They call it the Flexion. It consists of a 3D spacer textile, and it's treated with a very specially formulated responsive silicone coating. And it remains soft, and it's very flexible under normal conditions. But upon immediate impact, and I mean immediate, the material becomes instantly rigid, and when the impact threshold is over, it returns to a flexible state. Some of the applications include motorcycle wear, snow skiers, military, police, and any other market that might be relevant, like mountain climbers or arborists. Utility workers is another one. Ford, in the transportation market. Back in 2011, they used it on the Ford Explorer. They had these inflatable seat belts Now, as you may already know, vehicles have a number of sensors embedded throughout them. So they use the safety sensors will determine the severity of a collision, for example, and if it meets the threshold, it'll deploy the woven nylon airbags within 40 milliseconds of the crash occurring. Seatbelt airbags are then filled with a very cold, compressed gas instead of using the typical heat-generating chemical reaction that you'll see in more traditional airbags. Like I said, it was debuted in 2011 by Ford in their Explorer, and now they've moved on to some of their other models, and a lot of these have to get moved into the luxury vehicles because they can absorb the cost of doing this. Mercedes-Benz has one for in inflatable seatbelts, also in the rear in some of their models also. Now, a market that's really right down our alley at industrial fabrics is industrial smart fabrics. And Teitelbaum, who is a member of IFAI and a big player, they're out of the Netherlands and they have a big play in the United States. They've developed a system called GeoDetect. It's a sensor-enabled intelligent geotextile, which we have down here in the lower picture. And what it does is it provides reinforcement. You can see this embankment over here on the top photo. And along with that reinforcement, it monitors the soil with fiber optics that you can see in the geotextile underneath. And it also has an early warning alert system. So it physically monitors the landscape and what it does is it looks for strain or changes or degradation in the temperature of the soil and so forth. And it incorporates the geosynthetic fabric, like I said before, the fiber optics, and then the instrumentation. You can see the top picture in the lower right, and the software that goes with it for monitoring roads at railways, landfills, levees, slopes, and embankments, and so forth. Wearable electronics in the consumer market. In the last few years, 3 years, this has really taken off. First example I'm showing here is Bioman. It's a fabric from a Taiwan smart clothing company called AIQ. It's a compression jersey made of conductive fabric that is sewn together from stainless steel yarns. Now, the fabric monitors, and you're going to see a lot of other companies that have similar products that do a similar thing. They monitor heart rate, respiration rate, their skin temperature, and it's all integrated with your smartphone using Bluetooth connectivity and it sends the data to your smartphone where you can interpret it. Now, some other companies that are involved in this, and there are many that have really picked up, and I'm really picked up in the last few years. I have a slide on Sensora, and it shows, and they have a sports fitness bra and T-shirt that tracks and monitors vital signs. So we'll be talking more about that. Ralph Lauren has a polo T-shirt, smart shirt, tracks also, the sensors in it, also track vital signs. And then for the baby market, an organization called Owlet has a baby monitor and an infant heart rate, as well as oxygen monitor. And there's a sock that they put on the baby's foot, and it monitors the heart rate and oxygen levels. Now, if the baby stops breathing, then whoever's monitoring that, whether it's through the base station or their smartphone app, they can be alerted right away, and then they can go and try to do something about it. Then there's a company out of Montreal called Hexoskin. They have a sensor-embedded Hexoskin smart shirt that monitors heart rate, breathing, and a few other things like calories burned, the quality of a person's sleep, and more. Adidas has a band, looks like a watch, that has built-in heart rate monitor and activity level, where you can program in your activity levels, have goals and so forth to see if you want to achieve them. So they also have a training and running application that works in both iOS and Android devices. Now, here was an interesting product that came across really that we really learned about in the last year or so. And it applies to a variety of markets. And there are a couple California companies. Out of Pinole, California is Ionix. one of our sponsors, by the way. They manufacture smart fabrics, and they have a very patented formulation, and they take this and they apply the conductive polymer coatings to textiles, to fibers and yarns and so forth. And what this does is it makes the fabric piezo-resistive, in other words, sensitive to pressure. And then they have other coatings that make the textiles washable, which is really important in this market, and water resistant, and as well as FR, flame retardant. Now, in the last couple of years, I believe it was April of 2014, Ionics partnered with Bebop Sensors out of Berkeley, California, and together they've designed a co-designed proprietary Ionics smart fabrics to create what Bebop is called sensor solutions for the original equipment manufacturer market. And a lot of original equipment manufacturers have been banging on the door at Bebop Sensors because they've got something in mind that they want to develop. And so what I'm going to move on to is one of the things, and you'll see on the right here in this insole in the upper picture, is a monolithic fabric sensor technology that's used to integrate all these sensors together into one single piece of fabric over here. And Bebop, what they've done by doing that, has created a flexible electronic circuits that can be printed right on the fabric, and I've got another example on this, creating what we call a custom pressure touch sensor. So if you look at this insole on the right, there's 20 separate sensor regions on that, and they measure a person's their walking style, their gait, and it measures the pressure of their toes and the flexing and so forth. The whole point of this is to show the wearer how they can improve how to walk and run. As well as if you're a diabetic, if your feet are swelling, it'll detect that, and then you can follow up with your healthcare professional if need be. Key markets that they're getting into: automotive, medical, sports, and consumer electronics. Real quickly, just a couple examples I wanted to just mention. Wearable controllers. They use DuPont designed, because they came up with it, conductive inks. And these are stretchable circuits that, are printed right on the sleeves and the shirts, and they can connect to your smartphone. You can, without pulling your smartphone out of your pocket, you can shuffle your songs, you can do the volume up or down. In other words, you can control everything on your smartphone right off of, say, a printed circuit on your shirt. Car steering wheel helps with sensing driver alertness. Bedridden patients, like in the insole, there's a pattern of sensors that are all integrated together that can detect, because people who are bedridden tend to lay in one position too long. They will detect hot spots, in other words, where there could be potentially sores. So healthcare professional can help adjust that situation. Wearable electronics in the sports fitness market. Out of Redmond, Washington, this is Sensoria. They've been around for a few years. They have a running system that incorporates heart rate monitoring along with its smart socks, which is where they really started. And that product tracks step counting and cadence and foot landing techniques and so forth. The socks themselves are embedded. In order to do this, and here's an example of the sock on the lower. They're embedded with textile pressure sensors, but the new thing that they've come up with is heart rate monitoring, and it's done with using heart rate sensors that are embedded in the sports bra, and the T-shirts. And what it does is it provides them with a nice source of an accurate and consistent heart rate monitoring. Now, a lot of these types of products in the past have also had to have a strap to stabilize the monitoring system. This does not. Users can just like a lot of these types of technologies, they can pair their socks or their heart rate monitor through Bluetooth onto their phone, and then they can track and manage their progress of their fitness program. It also has a virtual coach on their phone, on their mobile app, that monitors their steps and will give them audio and video cues. Then there's another product called in the wearable electronics market, and it applies to a number of markets, and it's from Zephyr Technologies. It's called the BioHarness 3. They apply in medical, military, first responders, and sports and fitness. And So it was developed for those markets, and it monitors and stores and transmits the physiological data to a central location for continuous tracking. And you can see underneath here as an example, here's the bioharness module, and has a shoulder strap that helps to stabilize it. And then it sends its signal out through Bluetooth, and then there's the computer that receives the signal. And it monitors like electrocardiograms, heart rate, respiration rate, a person's posture. Globe will be coming up here talking about their WASP product, which is firefighters who also use this sensor. But it can let you know if the firefighter is laying down, standing up, and so forth. So posture is important. Just wanted to talk a little bit about our strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities, and kind of an overall look on the market. On the strengths, we have fast technologies that are advancing from supporting industries like electronics and software and mobile apps, and the internet, of course, and nanotechnology. And the big thing here is this general trend in miniaturization, which is making it easier for electronics to be used in fabrics. Research focus in a lot of universities, that's been going on for a little while. And a lot of the companies that have been working in this have been, for some time, have been small, medium-sized companies. So there's an opportunity for collaboration between them and the universities. Some of the weaknesses, because they're small, these organizations, SMEs, tend to lack the capital necessary to launch a product. They just don't have the critical mass. Their costs are high because they don't have the economies of scale to spread their costs off a lot of units. One of the things that another thing is a weakness is, for example, I had already kind of touched on this with the exoskeletons. They lack a long-lasting power source, which of course they're working on. And as a consequence of that, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, is developing a soft, low-powered exoskeleton suit that can be worn on a uniform. So a lot of these things, competing projects, are developed by various agencies, in particular in the DoD. The opportunities is strong market growth, and here are some of the markets: military, the communication that they're building in. There's antennas woven right into the military uniform, so they can have hands-free communication. They don't have to carry around as many battery packs and so forth. They have biomonitor, which we talked about a little bit. We talked a little bit about the ballistics protection, healthcare with the 75 million baby boomers, and then you have the 83 million millennials. And that is probably, the millennials would be more along the lines with the fitness market, but both these markets are doing a lot of tracking of vital signs and heart rate and breathing rate and so forth. So these have become really strong growing markets. The automotive, the advantage they have is they already have a battery. So they can integrate the power with the seating fabric, the dashboard, even the steering column, all kinds of things. Then the sportswear and footwear market, which is becoming really big. So again, very attractive markets. The threats, and this is getting better though. Electronics in the past has strongly been very aligned with other markets, like phones, smartphones, and computers, versus the textile industry. And part of it is just because of the incompatibility. Well, the textile industry, at least in the smart fabrics, hadn't been big enough to be attractive enough, but this is really changed. They used to have the incompatibility of manufacturing practices, specifications, dimensions of parts, if you will, of circuits, and so forth, for use in textiles versus the industries. And also in the past, devices were, their performance was what we call, I guess, insufficient. But again, they've gotten better and better, particularly in clothing embedded electronics, where it's become more seamless because of the ability to miniaturize circuits and so forth. There's been a slow adoption rate in some end user applications, such as the older folks, the baby boomers, but the medical monitoring has caught on real big with them. And finally, just kind of as I wrap up here in the last slide here or so, the future. Smart fabrics and wearable technology are really poised. This is a great time. We've got some great news I want to share on it right here in a minute. We still, again, have the sources with the issues with the power sources. But again, I've been hitting this hard the last few slides a little bit. The 83 million millennials who are very internet connectivity, they want all this, so they're embracing it. It's a great audience for these kinds of products. The aging population of the baby boomers strongly benefit from the health monitoring systems so that they can track their health. They can use the internet and send their data to their healthcare professional, and instead of having to go into the office all the time and be monitored. So it's saving costs in the healthcare system also. One of the factors that was really interesting that's helped supporting the smart fabrics market is the 70% of mobile phones and most laptops use BLE or Bluetooth low energy technology to enable sensor-based devices to connect to the internet. This is important. Now, we had a bit of news that was really exciting that came down the pike here on April 1st of this year. The Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, announced a consortium of 89 universities, as well as industry and manufacturers, nonprofits, and state government agencies, regional organizations. And they're all being organized by MIT, who will lead what is called a new, and I bolded this, Revolutionary Fibers and Textiles Manufacturing Innovation Institute. And this is in partnership with the Department of Defense. Now, the name of the consortium is called AFOA, Advanced Functional Fabrics of America, and they were chosen to lead this institute following a very intense and rigorous nationwide bidding process. The agreement between FOA and the DoD combines investments of $75 million in DoD funds and almost $250 million in cost sharing from non-federal investments, and this brings it up to around $317 million that will be supporting smart fabrics development, and it'll be located out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. Now, the institute brings together, as you can see, a lot of very non-traditional partners, which I had mentioned above here, where they're combining fibers and they're combining yarns and other capabilities, and they're creating textiles and fabrics that can do a lot of things that we've talked about here today. And that is sensing, storing energy, communicating, regulating a person's temperature, monitoring their health, changing colors, and a whole slew of other things. Now, one of the things I just want to finally wrap up about is really exciting about this market is I had mentioned there will be about 9.7 billion people by 2050. Well, there will be about a little over 11 billion by the end of the century, with 75% of them living in the cities. 9 billion, that's a lot, a big population, and it's going to drive how and where we live. They're expected to play a really key role in how things happen, and they're going to be operating in an environment that we have over here on smart. We're going to environ in an environment that supports it and nourishes it. It's smart cities. We have countries around the world, smart homes, smart healthcare, smart transportation, smart education, smart energy systems. Smart fabrics is going to play nicely in this sandbox. With smart intelligent devices going forward, we're going to have clothes and electronics. I think I'd mentioned this, but really, what's really going to help is that with this miniaturization of electronics, they become virtually seamless. They'll be working together. We won't have the problem. We'll have standards, which is something we need in this market. They'll be able to be washed over and over without them degrading. In other words, they'll become more adopted and accepted by the marketplace. Then they'll have people who you can heat and cool yourselves wearing phase-changing materials, which if you're overheating, your body will release heat. These phase-changing materials have a technology called thermocules in them. They capture and store it, and so it cools you off. And then if you are getting too cold, it will release that heat back to the wearers of the garments body. In other words, then it'll heat them back up again, so it'll regulate your thermal comfort. So it's really pretty neat. Then you're going to have people medically being monitored 24/7 who really need this, and it'll be embedded in their clothing. So there's a lot going on, and with this new institute, there's a lot of excitement going forward in the smart fabrics market, and it's just great to see. Right, that concludes my remarks for today in my presentation, and I really appreciate you guys being here and letting me deliver give you my time in my presentation. Now, if there's any questions, be happy to try to take. Sure. If you don't mind, on the back of your card, I'll get it. Hand it to me. I'm going to be here all day, and so if you want to, you can come up to me and we'll talk, and and I will do my best to follow up with you for any kind of questions you have. So you can see it's just so many directions it carries and why it's so important. It's a big deal. I think I see somebody.
You briefly touched upon standards. What organizations or groups are involved with this? Because right now it's kind of the Wild West out there, and we have a lot of vertical integration, but no horizontal across.
We're not there yet, but we know it's coming.
So who's anyone leading the charge on that, or are we just letting
I don't know if
itself out?
ASTM is in on this or not yet, but again, this announcement just came out 10 days ago. So that is something that we will be pursuing as a trade association to ferret all that out. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate that to get us started for the day. So now I would like to introduce our first demonstrators and presenters. The team from Globe is here. We've got Mark Mordecai, Kathy McNutt from Globe as well, and Claire King, the founder and president of Propel, a company dedicated to the development of textile-related technologies for the U.S. military and fire services. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Let's see, I've got the clicker right here, so we're good to go. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about wearable technology. And I'm Mark Mordecai. I'd like to introduce you to my colleagues. That's Kathy McNutt in the red jacket and Claire King. And we're going to do a little tag team presentation for you today. I'll talk to you about our wearable technology. Claire will speak a little bit about the unique development process behind electronic textile products. And Kathy will show you how our WASP system works. So for those of you that may not know, Globe is the largest manufacturer of firefighter turnout gear in the world. And that's the product that people wear, the protective clothing that firefighters wear to go into burning buildings. And we make all of our products right here in the United States in our factories in New Hampshire, Oklahoma, and Maine. But for the people of Globe, it's more than a business. It's really a passion. So although our principal product is protective clothing, our real mission is firefighter safety, making sure that everybody comes home at the end of the day. So at Globe, we have a long history of innovation. It's a fourth-generation family-owned and managed business that had its beginnings back in 1887. The founder invented and patented a three-layer system comprising an outer shell, moisture barrier, and thermal liner that's still being used in firefighter gear today. And that's the founder right there, actually. And this goes back to 1903. But since that time, Globe has had a role in introducing virtually every major performance textile advance into the fire service. Some of those that you might recognize is the introduction of 3M Scotch-Lite reflective materials back in 1953. We introduced DuPont Nomex, inherently flame-resistant fiber, in 1966, and we introduced Gore-Tex moisture barriers into the fire service in 1985. So innovation is really in our DNA. At the Fire Department Instructor Conference next week in Indianapolis, we're going to be introducing a revolutionary new turnout gear design that's enabled by breakthrough materials that developed in collaboration with Tenkata, DuPont, and 3M, all made here in the USA, and it's really going to define the future of turnout gear. So David, if you wouldn't mind running the video. So I told you we were going to reveal it next week, so you'll have to come to Indianapolis to see it. There's a theory of that's called risk compensation that really affects the fire service too, which suggests that people adjust their behavior in response to their perceived level of risk, becoming more careful when and where they perceive greater danger, and becoming less careful if they feel more protected. So that's playing itself out right now in the fire service. The dramatic improvement in protection provided by recent technologies has had the counterintuitive effect of allowing firefighters to go in deeper and stay in longer, thereby mitigating some of the improved safety that this new technology provides. So when you consider that firefighters are exposed and need to protect themselves from flame, thermal, and liquid threats, the hard work that they perform in performing their tasks, the thermal environment that they operate in, which obviously is quite elevated, and their personal factors, including health status, fitness, hydration, and medication, there's an enormous physiological strain on their bodies. So if we're going to take safety to the next level, we need to go beyond just creating a more protective envelope. We really need to drill down to monitor firefighters' physiological response and knowing when and where they are at all times. Wouldn't that make a big difference in firefighter safety? So we developed a wearable advanced sensor platform, and since everything has to have an acronym, we call it WASP. WASP integrates physiological monitoring and 3D location tracking into a single wearable system. That addresses two of the major concerns for the fire service: reducing cardiac events due to strain and overexertion, and locating and recovering a firefighter that's down in a building. A wearable multi-sensor platform is also a key capability that's prioritized by the Interagency Board, the IAB. This consists of representatives from federal, state, and local government, and agencies across public safety, homeland security, military, and occupational health. And I imagine there may be a few of you here in the room today. So although there are many startup systems that are working on capturing media attention, WASP is already developed, it's field tested, it's manufactured here in the USA, and in fact, it's the only wearable worker monitoring safety system in the world that tells you where a firefighter is and what condition they're in. In a word, WASP is commercial. So I'd like to take a minute to show you WASP at work. The Firefighter Combat Challenge is a physically demanding competition over a course designed to simulate firefighting activities. It's an ideal forum to test the robustness of our system and to capture the physiological strain on the participants. So would you run the video, please? Nope, from the last slide. There you go.
Dubbed the toughest 2 minutes in sports, the Firefighter Combat Challenge has been testing the physical abilities of firefighters and first responders for over 20 years. This high-fidelity competition pits two competitors against each other and the clock in a race to see who can withstand the physical rigors of everyday firefighting. Now paired with Globe's wearable advanced sensor platform technology, the challenge has become the premier place to test this incredible new system with some of the most physically fit firefighters in the nation. According to the United States Fire Administration, stress and overexertion accounts for 50% of the firefighter line-of-duty deaths. In the conditions firefighters experience on any given day, this is where technology like the WASP system can become a life-saving piece of equipment on the scene to collect and analyze how human bodies perform under such stress and aid in decision-making. Made from a comfortable, fast-drying four-way stretch knit fabric that wicks moisture away from the body, the WASP shirt has embedded physiological sensors mounted on an adjustable strap, which fits comfortably on the body. An electronic module developed by technology partner Zephyr Technologies attaches to the outside of the shirt to track the wearer's heart rate variability, respiration rate, activity levels, posture, and other critical physiological factors. The system can also integrate location tracking from technology partner TRX Systems in order to provide firefighters with invaluable indoor location data in 3D when GPS is not an option. All of this information collected on the wearer is sent back to a single system which collects, transmits, and displays user data in real time at a command station. Testing this kind of technology on a course like the Firefighter Combat Challenge offers competitors the opportunity to sample the comfortable base layer while engaging in physically stressful situations similar to what they would experience on the fireground. The WASP system is something you will only find from Globe. Currently, WASP is available for use by emergency responder training academies to improve safety and outcomes in training with the goal of learning how this tool can be further utilized during emergency response.
So you probably recognize Claire and Kathy in the video, so the movie stars. The Illinois Fire Service Institute, that's part of the University of Illinois system, is the very first training academy in the country that's going to deploy a complete WASP system. So that's very exciting for us. But in addition, you saw the TRX location tracking unit that was displayed in the video. It is also available for us to be able to track, beyond tracking firefighters inside the building, you can also use the WASP system to map high-risk buildings in the community. You can walk around the inside of a commercial building, noting where hazardous chemicals are stored, where access points are, where stairways are, or you could use it in a school, where you could map it, send it to the cloud, and then when it was needed, to be able to bring it down and to track the condition and location of emergency responders in the scene. So I'm going to ask Claire to talk to you a little bit about the complexities of developing e-textile products and the importance and the appropriate role of government in the process. Claire? There you go. Experience.
Good morning. So, as you can probably appreciate, WASP didn't emerge fully formed. In fact, I think it's a decade since Mark and I first had the conversation about solving this problem for firefighters. Globe was hearing this, the IAB had articulated it, as had other organizations in the fire service. And smart fabrics wasn't a phrase. No one was talking about it, but there were technologies out there. And so really we had to start by creating our own incubator to put this together. And where do I go? So what we did was we went out and we found the best of breed technologies, university-based science and industry, and crucially some government funding, because this was still very early technology readiness levels, even for some of the technologies, and put together our own accelerator incubator to develop this product. Globe I cannot emphasize this enough, and if you're going to do something in smart fabrics for a market as complex as the fire service, you absolutely have to have an industry partner. And as Globe has this long history, but a deep understanding and excellent relationships with fire departments, and they became critical to the development of the product. We had to have the voice of the customer at every stage, and I'll talk a little bit about how they actually helped us in testing as well. My company does textile development of new technologies primarily for DoD and then for the fire service with Globe. So we were really part of this in terms of textile development and the wearable design, the shirt itself. Zephyr was early stage, still at that point when we first started talking to them, but they'd received some money from the government to work to develop their technology for the US Army, and have since gone on to be extremely successful and now have been acquired by Medtronics and are part of that home monitoring and healthcare market. But they've remained a committed partner to us and helping us at every stage. And as their technology has improved, our system has improved. The same with TRX. We first identified TRX many years ago when they were just spun out of the University of Maryland through the location tracking conference that was crucially funded by the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Group and that was held at Worcester Poly for several years. And then Worcester Poly, not only was the location tracking conference an enormous help, we met everybody in the industry who was working on location tracking at the time and made some great relationships, but Worcester Poly became a partner in this as well, and through FEMA funding under the Assistance to Firefighter grants, we were able to obtain some funding to develop the graphical user interface, for example. Skidmore College is a very interesting college. They have a unique firefighter physiology lab and a deep understanding. Two professors there, Professors Pat Failing and Professor Denise Smith, have probably the deepest understanding of what happens to a firefighter when they're actually undertaking fire suppression. And I've mentioned the Department of Homeland Security and the FEMA funding. We received the substantial FEMA funding for testing at Skidmore and further development of the product. We also received, crucially, the last phase of funding from the US Army, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, and that was for transition to full-rate manufacturing. It's great to be able to make something that you can test in the lab or test in the field, and you can make a couple of hundred of them, but try making several hundred of them a week efficiently at a price that firefighters can afford. And that's really what we had to deliver at the end of this project. So I want to step back a little bit and talk about how this was the challenge. This slide is what we call our smart fabrics conversation. I've seen other versions of it elsewhere, but really it comes down to the critical factors between what you've got on textile side and the electronics or electrical side, however you want to define it. So in order to get to a smart fabrics shirt, and I'm actually wearing the shirt, so you can see it's comfortable, it's really great to wear, but it's got electronics in it. So we have to create a conversation between textile engineers, garment designers, and all kinds of engineers on the other side. Sometimes words don't mean the same thing in the two fields. So robustness means one thing in the textile arena and a completely different other thing in the electronics arena. And a gentleman asked a question about standards, and that is emerging now. They're starting to be talked about. But when we got into this, there wasn't any standards, so we had to really think about that as well. We had to think about that electronics is a hard system, textiles are soft and flexible, they don't work well together, how are you going to overcome that? And take into account human comfort at the same time. So with all of that, we developed the wearable advanced sensor platform with this conversation, and this conversation will never stop. Because one of the things, and Mark mentioned this, it's a platform. So as new technologies emerge on one side or the other, we're going to be interested in, do they apply to improving the product? This slide applies to anything you try to do in smart fabrics. My company has gone on now, and Globe's a member of this team as well. We're working on a project now for the US Navy, which we're calling the Smart Integrated Uniform. And this is a key part, which we've drilled down to many different layers in each of these boxes. So this is a complex slide, and usually when I'm in the audience, I hate getting these slides. It's like, I can't read it, but I hope that you can take it in. And we tried to sum up in one slide the entire, really 10 years of getting from the beginning conversation all the way through to full rate manufacturing and everything that was critical, and drill it down to something that could be put on in one place. Well, you have to start with your customer. You cannot ignore them. And in our case, we've already got a whole set of requirements around the uniform. The National Fire Protection Association puts out a standard called 1971, and we have to pay, and then 1975, which is the base layer, 1971 is the structural gear. We had to pay attention to that. Could we develop a uniform within that, a base layer within that can integrate into the uniform and meet the standards? And there's still some conversation about that, but we've really worked towards that all the way. We have a very, very comfortable FR fabric. You've also got to think about the technology capabilities. There's something in the Department of Defense when we work with users and in the fire service, a phrase that we have, the good idea fairy. And you sit down with a bunch of users and you're going to get lots and lots of good ideas. The thing is, how do you drill down those good ideas and create something that actually answers most of what they want, and sometimes gives them things they didn't even really expect? So we did that. We went out and we found, as I said, the best of breed technologies, and we developed a prototype. And then we started very early on, and this was probably year 2 or 3, putting that prototype into the field. And there, by that I mean we put it on firefighters. And 2 departments were very enthusiastic and said, we'll do it. Boston and Oxnard, California. Very different fire departments, very different environments, which was great. Different rates of structural fire within their operations. And we spent a lot of time with those fire departments, and then left them the gear and walked away, came back several weeks later and looked at the experience. And we have some pretty hilarious photographs of what these users, male and female, did to the shirt in order to make it comfortable, the first prototype. And I always think of that bro episode in Seinfeld, because some of the pictures were really funny. So from that, we went back to the drawing board and said, the shirt doesn't work. The technology needs to be adapted, the shirt needs to be redone, because it wasn't wearable. I mean, you couldn't wear it for a 12-hour shift without feeling significant discomfort. And you've got to have this thing wear and forget. You put it on, you don't think about it. We also realized we had to integrate it into the operations of the department. So the guy comes in, or the female firefighter comes in the morning, and they don't even have to think about turning this on. They don't even have to imagine. They don't have to do anything. It just works, and then the data's collected. So we went back and we did a lot more lab development. We did a lot of testing in the Skidmore's physiology lab of different materials until we came up with the right material for comfort. We tested the system in their lab with Zephyr very involved in that to make sure that we were getting good data. And then Zephyr did something that was pretty amazing. They integrated the estimated core body temperature algorithm that had been developed by the US Army. And that really works. And Kathy and I have done numerous tests. We did one at the Texas A&M training facility where we actually could see on the screen that somebody's heart, core body temperature was rising very, very quickly. Turned out to be a young woman firefighter who, instead of 3 people being on the fire line handling the hose, it was just her. And it caused her a great deal of stress. And so they were able to take her out and give her more time to recover, and she didn't get into a dangerous situation. So we did tons and tons of testing, and I can't, again, thank the departments that helped us: Fairfax, Annapolis, Atlanta, TEACS, which is Texas A&M, Illinois Fire Service. I'm probably leaving out someone, and I apologize if I am. And then the last piece was, tons of operational testing, full-rate manufacturing, and that's where the U.S. Army stepped up and said, this is important to us because the system that this shirt is actually going on into DoD, mostly at the unit level acquisition. There isn't, I wouldn't say there's an overall acquisition that's large scale, but units in some of our special elite forces are buying this, and they needed somewhere where they could get it reliably. And so Globe, and particularly Kathy, worked on that to set that up, so that you've got a textile garment manufacturer that's now able to create something that's got electronics in it, test it, and make sure it works every time. And one of the critical factors was launderability. I mean, it's got to be 100 washes is what we know it will go through, wash-dry cycles, and still work to make it affordable. So I think that's what sums up where we are now. We're in the commercial phase. We have a product that we actually can sell and is being bought, and it's creating a lot of excitement in the fire service. So I'm going to turn this over to Kathy because she's going to show you some information from a very fantastic demonstration we did in Nova Scotia a short time ago. Right.
Good morning. This demonstration, hold on the video. I'm gonna talk about this demonstration a little bit. Dave, hold on the video. I'll let you know. Okay. Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? All right. I'm gonna talk about this. This was a RIT exercise, rapid intervention team for Halifax at the North American Fire Trainers Directors Conference. And no, I'm all set. Thank you. Go ahead, run the video. What you're seeing there is one firefighter. On the left is the scrolling bio gauges, which show heart rate, breathing rate, and estimated core body temperature, as well as position. On the right-hand side is the level of the floor that the firefighters are on. So you've got one firefighter that is pretending to be a down firefighter, and two firefighters are going in to rescue him. And actually, that's me at the command station right there. You can look at this in both 3D and 2D views. It's the way the TRX system is set up, you're able to actually roll up to the scene and download from the clouds the building, the plot of the building, the number of floors, or if you don't have the ability to, you don't have that actually already set up in the cloud, you can actually roll up to the scene and map it out. In fact, with this particular demonstration, I was able to draw this building and put the floors in very quickly. The beauty of this system is that you're able to know where the firefighter is and also what condition they're in. What I'm showing you here is a bank of bio gauges. And again, these bio gauges, you saw it on where the GUI system was a combination of both location tracking and physiology. The beauty of this system is you can use the two systems independently as well for both live and after action review. You can use the physiology system for both training and conditioning the firefighter, just like you would an athlete. The firefighter has one of the most stressful, physiological stressful jobs. The hazardous conditions that they're in and day out, life or death situations, heavy gear, heavy tools, running, walking, crawling, climbing, in all of that gear. And so we really want them to be conditioned like athletes to respond to these emergencies. What you see here is, again, heart rate, respiration rate, estimated core body temperature. And these bio gauges can actually be set up however the safety officer or the coach who's conditioning the athlete would want them. There's other parameters that we can talk about that they can put in those bio gauges as well. The beauty of the Zephyr system is it has wonderful analytical tools behind it. So you can look live, and again, after action or even during the live demonstration, you can say, how is this person doing over time? And what this graph is showing you is that on the left-hand side is the estimated core temperature of the firefighter, and as Claire alluded to, they're using the U.S. Army patented where they were able to mathematically derive estimated core body temperature from heart rate variance with very high level of confidence. And on the right-hand side is the percent of heart rate confidence. So you can see this firefighter was doing exercises throughout the day, but he was able to recover very quickly. And his estimated core body temperature never got above 102. Zephyr has had so much experience working with professional athletes in conditioning, as well as home health care and hospital health care, that they have come up with different parameters to use and wonderful graphical analysis tools to use to be able to make decisions based on the data at hand. And this is a very complex graph, but basically what it's doing is it's showing the firefighter individual against the population. And that over time, you can use these different graphs. They can run repetitive conditioning exercises. You can see how that person improves and their condition enhances over time, just like the athlete. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Thank you, Kathy. And if you come out to the Propel exhibit outside, you'll be able to see some live monitoring of the physiological system. Claire mentioned that she's wearing a shirt today, as is Kathy and MI. So you'll be able to see what we're doing anyway. So why isn't WASPET in every fire department and on every emergency response team in the country? So in the consumer market, there are over 1 billion smartphones sold every year. And Fitbit has sold about 20 million of their personal fitness tracker devices. Investors have expressed some disappointment that Apple has only sold 10 million of their Apple Watches. This consumer market is driven by fitness lifestyle trends and the cool factor. So how many of you today are wearing one of those tracking devices? It's starting, right? The medical market is driven by outcomes and cost savings. If you can monitor a cardiac patient post-surgery at home instead of requiring expensive hospital care and repeat visits to the doctor, the savings are enormous. So if you follow the money for physiological monitoring, it's all about medical care. But the emergency response market is really a different marketplace. Despite a compelling need for a system that can help prevent injuries and save lives, there's substantial challenges to adoption. The fire service is very small compared to the real world, and it uses property taxes from local municipalities to fund the municipal services. There are only 1.1 million firefighters in the United States, but you probably don't know that there are only 300,000 career fire departments, and 800,000 of them are volunteers. With a long and costly development process and the time it takes from project to product, the lack of department money for acquisition, and the relatively small opportunity, it's almost impossible for a company to justify the investment that it takes to bring this kind of new technology to this marketplace. But by putting together best-of-breed technology partners, university-based science, and government funding, Globe has been able to create what no one else in the world has managed to do to date, to develop and commercialize a smart fabric system for worker safety and improve situational awareness and outcomes. We appreciate that DHS, through its FEMA Assistance to Firefighter Grant program, has funded the first complete deployed system for WASP at Illinois Fire Service Institute, and there's a continuing need for the government to help fund acquisition to make sure that we protect those that protect us and that everyone comes home at the end of the day. Thank you very much. So we probably have a time for a couple of questions. Right here. The question is, how do we choose our technology partners in monitoring location and in physiology? I'll let Claire speak to that.
Sure. You can hear me. I think that we have done a tremendous amount of market research and stayed up on what's going on in the market and who's doing what. And I think I mentioned there was a conference which was held, I think, last maybe 2012. For several years at Worcester Poly about location tracking. And just about everybody in the world showed up for that. And it turned out that TRX, which spun out of the University of Maryland and is located right at Greenbelt, is definitely the world leader in this. And so it's not that we haven't looked at other things, and I will say that the physiology technology we started with that proved to be unwearable, we dumped. And we found Zephyr and went to them and to see if they, I think again, Kathy alluded to the quality of their data and the quality of their algorithms, and we continue to see improvements every time they do an update. Motion artifacts from physiology are a big problem, and as you collect more data, as they have, their researchers are able to analyze that and to create algorithms that get rid of artifacts more efficiently. So it's a platform, so we're interested in other sensors. I think it will probably be a challenge for us to move from TRX and Zephyr right now, because we still believe that they are the world leaders in these things.
We did have the opportunity in our testing to validate the Zephyr system in our shirt against a gold standard Metcart in the lab, and that was one of the tasks that Skidmore helped us with. So we didn't get it necessarily right the first time. We think we're on the right track today, but we're certainly open to new technologies as they become available. Other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark and Claire and Kathy. That is incredible system that I think you guys have developed. I am very excited to welcome to the stage our next panel to talk about manufacturing challenges. I think we'll go a little bit more in depth into the slide that you saw earlier about smart fabrics. Please welcome to the stage J.J. Rayner, who is Special Assistant to the President for Economic Policy on the National Economic Council at the White House, where she works to coordinate interagency policy efforts across innovative sectors, including advanced manufacturing, autonomous and connected vehicles, and new on-demand business models. We also have Kaiser Hassanji of Adidas, Amanda Parks of Manufacture New York, and Despina Papadopoulos of Studio 5050. When I first spoke to Amanda, I thought that was an incredibly unique combination of backgrounds between textiles and tech, and then I spoke to Despina, and she also had this incredibly unique background of textiles and tech, and I spoke to Kaiser, and they had a very similar background as well, and I thought, well, it's not unique, it's just rare. And so I'm glad that we could assemble this panel here today to talk about manufacturing challenges for smart garments. So, JJ, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great, and thank you, Josh, and thank you to our panelists for assembling. I'll echo Josh in saying this is an incredibly exciting group to have together. Just briefly as we get started, from the White House's perspective, textiles has really been that poster child for the story of manufacturing in America writ broadly. In the 2000s, when manufacturing as a whole in the U.S. went through a decade of decline, textiles manufacturing really was at the tip of that nosedive, losing 40,000 jobs a year. And now, as we have exited the 2000s and really seen manufacturing turn the corner, what some have even characterized as a renaissance in manufacturing, with almost 900,000 jobs created just since 2010, textiles manufacturing is also at the head of that charge, with exports growing 40%, with employment stabilizing and even growing in the last few years. But it also really demonstrates some of the broader questions that we have to answer as we look to U.S. leadership in manufacturing and how to continue it, which is really how do we take the U.S.'s leadership in technology, particularly in this case many of those digital technologies, and take them out of the lab and actually into full-scale production, which involves answering many challenging questions about how do we connect very diverse communities. In this case, how do we connect the steel-toe boots and the stilettos and maybe even the Vans to maybe extend it a little bit too far? And how do we also solve not only technology challenges around the actual prototype or the product, but also those technology challenges that need to be answered when it comes to being able to produce at scale with a reliability and a cost that can really be competitive here. So I thought with this excellent panel, who each have a different grasp on that technology, from Kezar's role in a large multinational corporation trying to push them into that direction, to Amanda's really helping startups scale into production, and to Despina helping traditional companies think about it and where to locate, that we could each sort of take that on. So perhaps to start at the beginning, Amanda, do you want to walk us through some of the challenges that you help startups as they try and answer, how do I go from maybe a run of 100 to a run of 10,000?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. And so I'm the Chief of Technology and Research at a company called Manufacture New York. And we are a unique hybrid fashion incubator for fashion and fashion tech companies, a manufacturing facility, and a technology R&D lab for textiles and fiber science in Brooklyn, New York. And we are part of the AFA, the new Manufacturing Institute for the Revolutionary Textiles and Fibers, and we are also partnered with the New York City Economic Development Corporation on industrial modernization. So what we are doing is both trying to help save the sort of garment district inside of New York City, and basically vertically integrate a lot of the existing manufacturers, and then also bring innovation to this space through new process technologies, as well as kind of looking at new research. And I personally have been in the wearable space for kind of over 10 years. I did a PhD at the MIT Media Lab in this relationship between interaction design, smart materials, and robotics, and this naturally led me into textiles, sort of in the back end. And I worked in New York City for a while as basically a structural engineer for couture. That's actually a job in New York City. But also kind of moving forward into what is the future of wearables, and trying to think about, wearables are not just about electronics. They're about this convergence, the hard-soft continuum. And so when I think about the kind of startups that we have in our fashion tech incubator, we're trying to go after a segment of the market that is not the plastic bracelet market, the things that are not necessarily the sexy investments for venture capital right now, but things that are more like, and I'll talk a little bit more about Thesis Couture, which is actually a SpaceX spinoff that's working on re-architecting the stiletto with new ballistic grade polymers, and kind of literally using rocket science to make high heels, and other things like hydrophobic nanotech process technology. And these are companies that they're in between. They really need to be fashion brands. They need to kind of exist in the world of New York City fashion and have that kind of brand presence. But they also need to have the background, the infrastructure, the IP, the technology and the engineering of being a tech company. And how do you actually create, this is a new sort of 21st century version of a company?
Very cool. So when high fashion meets high science. And Despina, you have to answer many of these same questions, but helping players who may not come growing these technologies from the ground up, but are in a traditional space. What are some of the questions you help them think through?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to talk about wearable ecosystems. I don't, we keep changing the language. It used to be wearable computing, then it became fashionable technology, then wearable technology. And I think even that struggle in finding the right term shows that we are uncomfortable in bringing those two areas together. So I prefer to think about wearable environments or ecosystems because our clothing, in fact, is this interface between ourselves and the world. But in order to see any motion forward, you have to think of the entire system. So you talked about interaction design, user experience design. How does it feel to recharge your jacket? Should you recharge your jacket? When I put on my wool, I don't turn the cashmere on. The cashmere is on, it makes me warm, right? So what is that journey? And then, of course, it's something that I've been doing this for 20 years. I've did my first wearables project as part of my master's thesis at NYU. And at the time, I would go to Canal Street and try to find old headphone wires because it was the only wire that was flexible enough. So we've come a long way in terms of the technology. We have some amazing companies out here showing conductive threads, and people are trying to also coat them. And, we have a lot of progress. But when we talk about bringing those two areas together, how many of you have been in a garment factory and an electronics factory? Okay, that's a pretty good number. But yet they're very different. What they have in common is process, automation that we see progressively more and more in both areas. But if you go outside that realm and you go into the front end, design, calendar, mindset, you name it. It's like talking about two completely different worlds. And we've been saying for 20 years, these are two different worlds. And the previous panel talked about language. And it's really this interesting tension between it has to be robust, it has to be tight enough, it has to be waterproof, it has to be shielded so I can have good data, but it also has to be soft and malleable and washable, and it has to be able to flow. So that's both in terms of a metaphor and in terms of practice, a really difficult thing to connect. I'm particularly obsessed with connectors. I think it is the missing link, the last mile. So I've been doing a lot of work in that area. But it's also a metaphor that to connect these two industries is quite difficult. What is changing is whether it is a bottom-up, and consumers are showing interest and they are fascinated, or it's a top-down, we are seeing that finally we have people in the room who do come from traditional garment, textile manufacturing. I think even 5 years ago, you had some players who were interested. It was more of a PR play. Let's make sure that we don't miss out. But now we have some serious interest for people who can make the difference, who understand, who do own part of the infrastructure, and they want to leverage it and find a way to really connect in a meaningful way. So if we can get in a room, the textile engineer, but everyone at the same time, right? And the person who has to analyze the data, and the person who runs the factory, the guy who knows the tension for the thread. And then it goes back a little bit to education, right? I've done a lot of work in North Carolina. I'm working with a major thread manufacturer. They do all their development in Turkey. They can't find someone in North Carolina who knows how to set up, well, of course they can, but I'm exaggerating, but there is a lack of skill and of this continuity of integrated, to be innovative, because in order to be able to know how to incorporate even a new thread on a loom, right, you have to have everyone on that floor, including the guy who sets up the tension, be able to think differently and innovate. So I think that's a very important thing to bring into the conversation. How do we set up this framework where we can be experimental, where we try things out, and we can have a meaningful conversation and bring everyone to the table from the very beginning? So that's what I'm trying to do with the people I work with, whether it's very established companies or startups, to just identify the system, and then what, as a good designer, you do. Here's the opportunities, here are the challenges, and how do we turn the one into the other, because the environment is changing rapidly. And we have now prototyping technologies that no one can say, well, I can't experiment. I did a bracelet 15 years ago with NCR, the National Cash Registry. It was a precursor to e-payment systems. And in order to make a flexible circuit, the setup fee, just before we made any, was $15,000. Last semester at NYU, my students made their own flexible circuits for $20, right? So it's a completely different environment, and one that it lends itself to innovation, experimentation. And that's the only way you can push forward, if you try things out. I strongly believe that.
I think that's a fabulous segue of talking about how do we get traditional industry engaged. To Kezar, who, your personal story is really an illustration of this, going from working in almost every function and role at a traditional chemical manufacturer to working with Adidas to help, I believe, the German soccer team win the 2014 World Cup. So perhaps you could sort of narrate it from I'm sure Argentina thinks she stole some things as well. But so perhaps, you could just tell us from your personal narrative what you've seen and learned through that transition from traditional to this sort of forefront of technology.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, JJ, and thanks, Josh and IFA for hosting this and inviting me. So as JJ was saying, we've been bringing wearable technologies and smart fabrics with Adidas. It is a fact that German national team won the World Cup, and it is a fact that they use our system to train before that. So you can bring the two together, and all the credit goes to, but anyway, so before that, we were a startup called Textronics based out in Delaware. And before that, I was part of DuPont, the largest global textile company in the world at that time, right? And DuPont, they took cotton and brought nylon with functionality, polyester with more functionality, Lycra with more functionality, Nomex, Kevlar, and this was the next apex project for DuPont in terms of bringing textiles and electronic functionality together, because textile is obviously very ambient in our lives, as well as electronics was getting more and more ambient. So that is where we started. I mean, like Amanda and Despina, I've been in this thing for a little bit also. This white hair shows how long I've been on that also. So there we started to look at sort of the core materials, including conductive or smart polymers, smart yarns, smart textiles. And there the intent was we have textiles touching our daily lives 95% of the time, or more or less. It was not just wearable at that time, but it was also carpets, which was a big textile business for obviously DuPont, tablecloths, drapes. You sit on textiles, you sleep on textiles. So if you're surrounded by textiles all over, and how do you bring more functionalities in? So that is where we got started, right? And it so happened when DuPont decided to get out of the textile business, we had the opportunity of taking that intellectual property and spinning off Textronics. In Textronics, we looked at helping the industry with some material technology that they can bring new functionalities and new user experience with it. Lo and behold, it was so early on that that was more of a challenge, and as a small startup, we didn't have the wherewithal to train the whole industry in terms of how to use smart materials. So we took that. Our initial goal was to look at medical, because that is where the big opportunity was, as Despina was mentioning about it. However, it takes a little bit longer runway, more regulatory and all that. And we found the sweet spots in sports at that time, right? So in 2004, 2005, when we spun off, we created the first heart rate monitoring sports bra, right? And that was under the Numetrics brand, because we were working with some brands, and the brand takes their own time. As a startup, you do not have the luxury of taking all the time you want in this world, so we had to do that. And then there were a lot of lessons learned. This was like a little bit early on, 2005, right, where the wearable, I don't think the wearable term existed at that time, right, and the industry was not evolved as much as it is today. So we had to put in all the components pieces together. So we had the yarns, we had to make fabrics out of it, we had to make sure that the sensors that were embedded in the fabric were as comfortable and as good as the fabric itself and the garment itself. Our first production lot was in North Carolina. So that is where we started making these smart fabrics. And I think we have in the US the credit of saying is like, we made the first commercial heart rate monitoring sports bra right here in North Carolina. That is where we started out with. And we had a few successes, but we actually have a lot more failures that I don't like to talk about it, but that's what we learned from, right? But for example, the first few batches that we ran of the material, we had to throw off, right? Because in a typical textile mill, a lot of thing goes, right? I mean, the shade is slightly off, but it still looks good. But more importantly, the fit is slightly off, but it still looks good. Here, with sensors embedded in it, either it works or it doesn't, right? So there isn't any in-between in it, right? And if you leave it in the dye bath for a little bit longer, you do not process it soon enough, or you let it sit when it is wet, all of those creates problems. So unfortunately, we learned it the hard way, right? But that is how we got along. So we did make significant amount of production in North Carolina. There were things, there were challenges that were happening in the industry. This was 2005, 2006. Overall, we moved production to California because there was a better production capability there. And there again, because all of these used to be small batches, right? So the manufacturer had to have a big program going on, right? And these were small, nice things to do at that time, right? But as the big programs faded away, there was difficulty to support these small programs as well, right? So we moved from North Carolina to California to Canada to Turkey to Sri Lanka to China. So similar products, we had to go all over the world. And a small company, it becomes very difficult, right? So fortunately, when Adidas acquired Textronics, they had more wherewithal in terms of sourcing capabilities globally. That is what we did, right? And because, JJ, this is more in terms of like the economic forum, also in terms of what can be done here in the United States, I just wanted to dwell a little bit on that. We obviously can go outside and do that. But my perspective is like there is a lot of opportunity for it to be done here. Even the product that we made for the German national team, the electronics were made right here in New Hampshire. So that is where you made all of it, right? So the benefit of doing something close to home, be able to work on it, is tremendous, right? And how do we foster that? How do we cultivate that, right? I mean, the fact that electronics and textiles don't necessarily go together, it is very obvious with all the textile, somehow you want to wash that, and also electronics don't like to be washed in a washing machine. How do you sort of bridge that gap and bring that together? Fortunately, nowadays, there are a lot of core components that are available, including like connectors. When we first started out, we looked at all different types of connectors. And as you also mentioned, the ecosystem is evolving. So nowadays, when we bring a system out, right, we talk more about the experience in terms of how it helps you make fit, how it helps you become a better soccer player or a better basketball player, right? How it helps your well-being. We don't talk much about the technology, even though the core technology is smart textiles that we started working on 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? But now the ecosystem is such that these sensors or these technologies help you get data. You have to get better at terms of analyzing the data, and then you have to get better at analyzing the data for insights to the consumer. That is what's going to get it going, right? And that is where our focus has shifted in terms of how do you bring experiences through insights which happen to have these core technologies. And part of this whole conversation, I'm assuming this today, is like, okay, how can a lot of this be done in the US? Obviously, where you need the right resources, you go wherever it takes. But how can the whole process be simplified for smaller startups as well as large corporations to cooperate and bring this together more at home?
Well, that's a fantastic segue. And I think one of the things, Kesar, that you mentioned was that in this period of the 2000s, as the sort of large-scale production went away, that also made it harder to sustain some of the more innovative edge of this manufacturing, and that there's also connections between capabilities that may have been lost. Well, as Amanda mentioned, we just 2 weeks ago announced the Revolutionary Fibers and Textiles Manufacturing Institute, which will be run by FOA up in MIT. And they are very focused on how do we identify not only the technology gaps that need to be solved to manufacture at scale, but also really how do we regrow that industrial capability in the U.S. And so from your experience, what should be on the sort of top 3 list of priorities for this? I mean, you're a member, so maybe you should just say, but what would be your kind of punch list of here's what we need to go solve if we really are to be competitive for producing this here?
Oh, sure, I can
for
jump
the panel, but
yeah, sure. So I guess, Jasmina is obsessed with connectors, as am I. We talk about it all the time, but also I'm obsessed with power as well. So I talk a lot about the idea of fiber batteries. But so we can go through sort of independent technologies, but really the kind of, what I'm focused on overall is how do we dematerialize or rematerialize an entire circuit, right? So how do we make it like really soft and actually turn into fibers? So each fiber has the functionality of a different component of a circuit, and to really kind of rethink it that way. So I like to think, so for example, there's a sort of story about how do we start to talk cross-industry. So Professor Dan Steingart, who is a great researcher at Princeton, and he's working on fiber batteries, he's an electrochemical engineer, and his grad students have made, these very small segments of these fibers, but of course they don't know anything about weaving. So, I'll go down there and then introduce them to Shimaseki. They're literally 10 minutes from each other in New Jersey. They've never heard of each other. They're just in totally different universes. And to try to get them to think about, okay, how do we actually try to construct a battery from this potentially knitting these fibers together? What is the voltage and current ratios, as a pattern? So just like these whole new kind of like higher level concepts about what does it mean to have literally a soft circuit. But then also, going back to FOA, we also are very much thinking about a whole new sort of generation and genre of a workforce. And we're in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, and we have historically a manufacturing sort of community around us, and potentially a walk-to-work population, and we are desperately in need for new training processes. We're developing educational systems, apprenticeship programs that will actually kind of train new workers, not just sort of in what you think of as standard sort of sewing, but how do they understand computer numerically controlled machines, how they can run that. It becomes cross-industry, and this is more and more what's happening inside of fashion and technology, and this allows them to be fluent in these tools. So I think that's, to me, as much about the sort of the future of the educational system as well as pushing the technology forward.
I think very similar. It's facilitating this interdisciplinary dialogue, understanding what the capabilities and the limitations of each one, and really try to go at it with no assumptions. I always say assumptions or expectations kill possibility. So how do you look at the same thing from a different point of view, and you're open to really disrupting it? And fashion, and I know it's not just about fashion, it's traditionally quite conservative, contrary to popular belief, right? And so as these various industries come together, how do we look at what clothes do, what they are, what is service, what is well-being? How do we start having conversations and interesting partnerships from people with people who come from a different point of view, whether it's pharmaceutical companies and textile companies, and really, I think this notion of really breaking down the system and understanding what the system is, and where the human or the problem sits in the middle, I think it's critical. And in that sense, it's quite liberating, because then you start thinking about it's more of a mindset. It's not just about smart textiles, but it's also about thinking how the value. I mean, first of all, what is the value that you create? We all know the statistics, how 1 in 3 Americans, when they buy a Fitbit, after 6 months it stays in the drawer. Well, why does it stay in the drawer? Well, maybe because it did its job, and now you do take the stairs and eat less pasta. Or 2 is because you just can't be bothered to charge it. Mostly because the value is not evident to you. But when you start thinking about value, how do we make sure that we also have good labor practices and we don't pollute the environment, and we create new things out in the world that solve some problems and not create more? And I think we all know about fast fashion. The calendars are getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and we start thinking about blanks, and we have this stuff. But could this technology somehow alleviate, or if we assume that as human beings we're not suddenly going to change and make do with 3 outfits, if we still have this desire, how do we leverage new technologies, whether they are about customization, lower minimums, making one-offs, to actually keep feeding the demand with doing less harm on the end of labor practices in the environment? So there is a really great opportunity to rethink this fundamental system that we live in. Of course, then you started introducing electronics, and we have to recycle the electronics. So it's a tricky conversation, but being mindful and systemic in your thinking, and make also some demands from the regulatory perspective, where you have to be responsible for recycling the electronics. So you create those balances as well. I think it's a really exciting time to have this conversation, because the advances in electronics, in textile engineering, in all sorts of materials, the material that you talked about earlier, phase-changing, hardening impact. We have an aging population. We have the biggest aging population ever. 1 in 3 kids that is born today is going to live to 100. So if we have materials that can be as flexible as my pants, but if I fall, I don't get a broken hip, which we know is the fastest way to morbidity. Well, now we start thinking about a different world, that you create value and you have these forces playing with each other. But mostly it's just changing the mindset and agreeing as a culture or society, what values do we have and which ones do we want to promote, and then how do we use, but also how do we develop our technologies to support these values. I think that's... I did do a master's in philosophy before studying design, so you have to.
Yeah, and I think I share the opinion with Amanda and Despina saying, one of the things, this conference kind of helps in terms of looking at smart fabrics more like 2.0 or even 3.0, right? When we were first starting out there was some of these smart fabrics happening. When we were involved in there, our mindset was always, how do you make it commercial, right? How do you make a commercially viable business? At that time, in the late 90s, early 2000s, actually the government and defense put a lot of money into smart fabrics, right? And there was a lot of one-of-a-kind, like there's a $1,000 dress and a $1,500, $2,000 article and things like that. But they were not necessarily going to be commercially viable, right? And so from the DuPont mentality, we were all looking to see, how do you make something which is actually going to be a commercially viable business? So the sports bra, I'll keep talking about the sports bra a few more times. The Heart and Morning sports bra was priced at like about $40, $50, $60, a little bit price premium, right, than the regular good sports bra, but still affordable, right? And then you bring new features in there. So that is where it started out to be. But then the electronics kind of took over, right? And now, I mean, Mark was sharing the numbers in terms of Fitbit and all that. There was a pendulum swing where everything kind of went more on the hardware electronic side, right? And I think it's going to come back again, right? Now it's going to be more in terms of textiles, because textile is still inherently what we wear or touch every day. I mean, we're not giving up on textiles anytime soon. So how do we bring that back where we do integrate that? I mean, not everybody wears a watch, right? I mean, I gave up on the watch 10, 20 years ago, right? And the consumers would need choices. I mean, some of them still want to track based on a watch. Some may want some headgear to track. But most of us would like the clothing to be smart, right? Or like the carpets that we walk on to be smart, right? Or the tablecloths to do something more, or the drapes to do something more. So that whole smart fabrics, I think it's probably 2.0, 3.0, that we can help bring it back, right? The thing would be is like, it's got to be commercially viable at the right price point so that it grows, because, I mean, honestly, there isn't a huge business today in terms of smart textiles, right? I mean, not as much as we would like it to be, right? Okay, it's happening, but at a much slower pace. So how do we reinvigorate that? There are a lot of key components now available. There is a lot more availability in terms of ecosystems, database management. There is more happening today in terms of analysis and insights so that the consumers get the experience through textiles, through smart textiles. And I think that is what we hopefully can focus more on in terms of bringing the resurgence on that one.
There's another technology, I think, that is critical in this conversation on the front end, which is now you have more and more designers in the apparel industry doing 3D fit and 3D pattern making, which makes it so much easier to be able to visualize, okay, where am I going to put my sensor? How am I going to route my wiring? As well as creating a language of efficiency on the side of the designer team to understand and think not in this two-dimensional plane. So all of these confluences are coming together. So hopefully we'll see some faster-paced development.
So on that note, one of the things I find most fascinating about this conversation is that you're taking an industry like apparel and fashion, where there's a high concentration of designers and R&D staff, and this idea of having to do fast product cycles that really are on some horizon of effort. You have that group, and then you have, you know, the sort of more traditional textile manufacturers, many of which are hunkered down after a decade of real challenges, many of which are in the small to medium space, maybe have an engineer at best on their staff, certainly not an R&D department. What are some of the challenges that, you know, sort of a fast fashion apparel group has to think through when you're going to try and work with one of these companies that actually probably has a lot of expertise in how to actually produce, but may not speak that same language or may not even have the staff capacity to really engage in that R&D process?
Yeah, so I end up talking about this a lot when fashion companies come to us, and this is really about business models and thinking about the difference between how the fashion industry works and how tech companies work. And the fashion industry does not have a history of internal R&D. You know, they're really dependent on what textile producers are making and how that's getting developed, which is completely sort of severed from the kind of the fashion company in that development cycle. They're starting to kind of open this up, but it really is an entire kind of cultural shift for them as a business. And then when you start to kind of think about, you know, how do you then end up talking to technology companies? So the development of this product, which is Thesis Couture, which is a SpaceX spinoff, you know, when we started this, the team consists of a rocket scientist, a material scientist, a mechanical engineer, me, a high-end Italian shoe artisan, and a shoe designer, and an orthopedic surgeon. So navigating these conversations is basically the biggest challenge, has been the biggest challenge of my career. How do you get those people to talk to each other, speak the same language, and get them on the same page that there's really a product there, and then let alone getting them to actually then make something, right? So I think that from that perspective, really, we have to kind of go in from both sides. And I always tell fashion companies that, you know, the more you can sort of get inside, own your own supply chain, own your own research, start carving out. And one of the ways that we talk about doing it is start carve out some of those marketing and advertising dollars, like put that into R&D and you can spin it, right? So like, how do we sort of slowly inch inch things together in that way. And so you really do have to think about product cycles that are more like 5 years, which in fashion has been very, very rare.
So my comment, and again, there's it's great to involve fashion from the very beginning. And we being more from the engineering side did not value that as much initially. But now that becomes more and more important. And I want to come back to the point also is let's make sure that from the very beginning, we're looking at something which is going to be commercially viable as a volume business, right? We've done a lot of work in terms of one-of-a-kinds and high-end that can be very good for display and a museum, but we are really looking for things that we can develop, which the consumers like us in this room and beyond can actually start using that. And we are all willing to pay a slight premium for the value that we get, right? But we're not going to pay astronomically high prices like 2x, 5x, 10x of what we would typically do. So in addition to bringing all those people that you mentioned on the table, Amanda, we also need to make sure there's a business person or there's a commercial person to make sure that there's, I work a lot with the academics, right? And then the great place is to bring technology out, right? But typically when an academician thinks like this is ready to commercialize, it is probably stop step 2 or step 3 in a 100-step process, right? And how do you make sure that it goes all the way to where it is going to be commercially viable and bringing the value to the consumer?
I was really, you mentioned two things, that yes, the traditional fashion companies don't have an R&D department. I just want to tell a story. I was last month in El Salvador on a conference on the textile and garment industry there. Here's a country that 10 years ago they were really only sewing pieces together, right? People would ship cut pieces and stitch them together. And now they're this great hub for synthetic textiles. And the conference was about innovation in light of TPP. How can they remain competitive if the TPP passes? And I was very impressed with the overall spirit, and how many factories there have really pivoted and keep exploring new business models, whether it is we have no minimums, you want to make one, we'll make you one, or really doing a lot of internal development. So they're big factories that produce for all the major brands we all know. And in the past few years, the fashion brands are asking them to do textile research. And now they're starting to actually develop new fabrics so they can have more of the supply chain, right? So here, in 10 years, we're talking about a place that they were literally just stitching pieces of cloth together to now creating new business models and starting doing internal research. So the lesson there is to be open, to be innovative, and find good partners. So maybe fashion brands should not start having R&D departments, but can they find good partners and support their partners and say, okay, we're not going to have an R&D department, but you are, so we're going to give you 18 months as opposed to 11 that we typically do, or 8, or that calendar time keeps closing down, right? And create investments and partnerships of that sort where you really you understand the value you can get, and you share the risk to some degree. I think that's also interesting and important to consider.
That's very interesting. Josh, do we have time for a couple questions from the audience? I don't want to hog our wonderful panel here, so if folks have questions from the audience, perhaps we can have folks approach the microphone here so that folks can hear you, and then we'll take maybe 2 or 3, time depending.
Good morning. Aloha. I'm from Hawaii. I'm Sarah Tenney with Blue Export Group. We're interested in any comments you might have about how you compiled the market of wearers to get the feedback that you need. In Hawaii, we have a lot of different diverse cultures and things like that. So if we go to market with different products for our clients, we don't know how to get feedback fast enough so we can change the design in alignment with whatever's being produced.
So one example I'll say is like when we were first doing this first Heart and Mind apparel, what we actually did is like looking at the market that we were going into, we actually tried to scope out and see like, forget the smart part of it for a minute. Like, what is the garment that the consumers today use and wear which is most comfortable to them, right? And then how can we embed technology in there so that the comfort piece remains intact, but it brings more functionality into it, right? So that is what we did. Like we took one of the most popular sports bra and embedded sensors into that so that people did not have to change behavior, right? But they got additional information or functionality about that. That would be one way to do that. The second way is like, I mean, as you grow and develop, like what we did is like we constantly were in touch with the consumer that we intended in mind, right? And at every step of the way, we engage them all the way so that we are not going way off tangent and not making sure it's being of use.
I have two answers. The first one, sometimes when you develop a very new idea, focus groups can only help that far. And I love the Ford quote, if you asked what people wanted, they would say a faster horse, right? So sometimes it's hard to have people imagine that's not there. But then I teach also a class on wearable design at NYU, and I tell my students, the moment you have an idea, just go out there and test it. It doesn't have just paper prototype. Take a piece of duct tape. Go out to the beach. Just talk to random people. Say, hey, would you wear that? So start really slow and really early, and then you just like the lean startup methodology. Get it out there. Get feedback from your friends, from people in the square. And then you start doing more formal once you have something that you can get actual feedback on. So invest in user groups and user testing, but also mobilize everyone, your friends, your family, the surfers, to just test it as a concept, and then as you keep iterating.
Yeah, and agree with that. Just quickly to add, I mean, this is something that fashion brands have traditionally done really well. Actually, they're very close to their consumers, and using social media, Instagram, the feedback through all those services, and creating the kind of buzz and hype really goes a long way now in both directions. So that's just kind of quick add on it.
User testing companies.
Yeah, and so a couple of things for me that's been so fascinating in this conversation is seeing the parallels between the sort of fashion startup and the maker community, which we've worked with pretty extensively. And in fact, there's many folks who would identify in both camps. And there are, as Christina mentioned, some interesting companies that have really specialized in having an online community of prototypers and testers. So Quirky is one that I would just comes to mind immediately, but there's many that have that business model. In addition to companies that have, I think, done a good job of modularizing the inputs to these types of processes, from the DIY bio, where you can literally get little bio kits and do your own genomic stuff, which is interesting, or to folks like Arduino who have created the circuit boards. I think that's another part that's empowering this. Do you have a question here?
Yeah, this is more for maybe Amanda. The shoe project, you touched on that just a bit. I'm curious how you kind of, with all those different perspectives coming together, how did you approach that project in terms of convening all those folks and identifying the right people to pull into that project? Maybe if you could speak on that.
Right, yeah, absolutely. So the founder of the company, Dolly Singh, she's Elon Musk's former head of talent. So she's built some really incredible teams. She basically built SpaceX, that team there. So I have to sort of attribute that to her. And really, it started from her identifying with the scientists and the engineers there to say, like, what's going on? Why am I surrounded by the world's best technology at SpaceX and my feet are dying? What's wrong with these shoes? And the engineer's going, I don't know how shoes are made. What's in there? And so I think it was really a slow process. And quite frankly, we've been working on one pair of shoes for almost 3 years. So you can't. There's no way that I know of yet to really speed that up. And building the team slowly and going through the kind of painful initial discussions, and then I think that then when you just start building, right? So then Matt and I are mechanical engineer. We just jumped into CAD, right? And we're doing it through finite element analysis, and I can talk through that process. But start having design reviews. You have something to look at. You have something to touch. Just 3D print everything. Get it all. Just get it all out there, and then the right stuff starts to bubble up. So I think that just lots and lots of talking and lots of looking, feeling, touching And yeah, having an incredible kind of leader that is really about talent management, it has been an incredible experience as well.
We have time for probably one last question, if there is one. Otherwise, I think I will just say thank you to our incredible panel. It's such a unique opportunity to have you all together and to hear these perspectives, so thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you to Spina, Amanda, JJ. Thank you. Kaiser, thank you so much. We have a short coffee break for the next 10 minutes. So please rehydrate and we'll take a seat. If somebody tells you that apparel and textile isn't rocket science, talk to Amanda. Thank you.
Starbucks or